Hello, my name is Mitchell Pearson here at Pragmatic Works, and this is episode 4 in our Introduction to Azure Synapse Analytics series. In this video, we're going to talk about a really important topic here, which is Azure Data Lake, and we want to dive into that. Before I do that, if you like this video, make sure to remember to hit that like and subscribe button. Also, if you want a deeper dive into Azure Data Lake and Azure Synapse Analytics as a whole, take a look at our live training boot camps that we do, as well as our on-demand learning platform where we have over 70 classes. All right, so in this video, what I want to do is an introduction to Data Lake, and I also want to talk about different ways that we can interact with our Data Lake. Specifically, I want to dive into the topic of Azure Storage Explorer, which is an awesome tool that we have available to us. But before we do that, what is Azure Data Lake? What is it? Azure Data Lake, I like to think about it kind of like a OneDrive account. It's obviously not a OneDrive account, but there are some similarities there, right? Instead of me storing my data on my laptop, on my local machine, I take that data and I put it in a OneDrive account, which is essentially a Microsoft data center, right? It's a data center. It could be across the street. It could be 200 miles away, but it's a data center where Microsoft is managing a bunch of computers and a bunch of hardware, and they're storing the data for me and they're managing it, right? There's a lot of benefits that obviously come with that. At a more enterprise level, we have Azure Data Lake, which is very much the same thing. Instead of my organization keeping all of our data on premises in a closet over there, we're taking that data and we're storing it into the Azure Data Lake where Microsoft manages it. They keep it secure. They make sure the hardware is running. They keep multiple copies of the data ready to go for us. That's awesome. Now, what do we use Data Lake for? Well, there's a lot of conversation around this piece that we need to talk about. One of the things is we can use it just to stage data before we load it into a database. Historically, that's what we've done a lot with files, right? We get files from third-party vendors, or we have applications that generate files. We take those files, and then for analytical purposes, to be able to go back and look at the analytics, we have to then take that data and put it into a database. But there's a new topic that I need to do a video on. There's lots of blogs out there called the Data Lakehouse. And the Data Lakehouse is this idea that we don't have to take the data out of our data lake. We can actually leave it there and we can write queries against it and we can secure it. And so a lot of the benefits that we've historically gotten from relational databases now exist in the data lake through performance enhancements. We can query the data directly. And we're going to get into some of that later in the series when we get into talking about things like serverless SQL on demand, which is pretty cool. So what is Azure Data Lake? It's really a place within a Microsoft data center where we store our data there and they manage it for us. And that gives us a lot of flexibility and versatility as an organization. Data Lake also comes with a lot of key features here. We get unlimited scalability. What that means is that if all of a sudden our company says, hey, we have 700 terabytes of data. I actually have a friend who's a storage engineer, and their company said we have 565 terabytes of data. We need to move that data to Microsoft and dump it into a data lake. They were able to do that without really much fear of not having enough room at that Microsoft data center. And so Microsoft touts this as essentially unlimited scalability, meaning you can put as much data as you want in there, and then whenever you work with that data, it will scale accordingly. We also get security support for access control list. This is one of the big elements that makes that data lakehouse concept I was talking about a moment ago a little bit more feasible. Access control list gives us the ability to essentially, within a data lake where we have that hierarchical namespace, a true folder structure, where we can apply permissions at the container level, the directory level, even down to the blob, the individual file level, so that when somebody logs in with their Azure Active Directory account, which is tied, of course, their username, their permissions, their multi-factor authentication, when somebody logs in, they can only see the data that you've given them very granular permissions to. This is really awesome, and this is one of the key features of Azure Data Lake versus your Azure Blob Storage account. We also get an optimized driver, an ADFS driver that's designed for big data analytics. This is not something you get with the Blob Storage account, because with Data Lake, it's been designed from the very beginning, from the ground up, to it's designed for handling massive amounts of data, right? It's designed for big data analytics. And so with that driver, we can connect to the Data Lake and get better performance. When we get into our notebooks later in this series, you're going to notice that the connection I use is the ADFS connection, not the WASP connection, which is the more kind of there for backward compatibility legacy connector. We also get zone redundant storage and geo redundant storage. What that means is that with Gen 2, we're able to store that data in multiple data centers, not just in the one data center. We're able to put it in other data centers, whether that's in another geographical region, right? I could have a data center where my data is in the East US, but also if something was going on in the East US where I could no longer access my data, I can have copies of that data in the West US, right? So I can immediately get back online, or within a short amount of time, get back online. My applications are running. We're not losing money. Very important. Now you got to pay for that. I think geo-redundant storage ends up being about twice as much as keeping it locally. What you get by default with Azure Data Lake is you get what's known as a local redundant storage, which gives you 3 copies of your data in that data center. So if one data rack goes down, runs out of power, blows up, whatever might happen with that data rack, you have 2 other copies of your data in other data racks. So if that one goes down, you're immediately rerouted to another copy of your data, and you might not even notice that something ever went wrong, right? Microsoft has you back up and running. So there is that high availability kind of redundancy that is in place. The other thing is around data security here. Like I talked about before, Azure Active Directory is an awesome feature that we get with Data Lake that we don't get with your general purpose blob storage account. Data Lake gives us that capability, and that's why, just going to be honest with you, we recommend to all of our customers that this is where you should start with Data Lake. Now, one thing I want to tell you, and I tell people this when we're doing our Azure boot camps and things like that all the time, Azure is not always right down the middle. It has to be this or it has to be that. A lot of times you might have both. I might have a lot of my data in Data Lake, but then I have blob storage over here. And because I need worm storage, I have to have some of my data in that blob storage account because Data Lake doesn't necessarily support that. The number of things that Data Lake doesn't support are less and less nowadays than what they used to be. And so this conversation is a lot easier with customers. Generally, we point them directly to Data Lake. Not to mention, as we've already talked about in this series, you know, Data Lake is required for Azure Synapse Analytics. There must be a primary Data Lake set up as part of your ASA workspace, right? And we talked about that in the very, first and second video in this series. All right. So the next thing I want to talk about here is a little bit of working with Azure Data Lake and what that looks like. The first thing is containers. All right. At the very high level, we have container. You'll also notice it referenced as a file system in some places. Container/file system. When you create a container or when you create a file system, it must be all lowercase, no special characters, anything like that. So something like just training. And we can set ACL permissions at the container level. So you want to be strategic with that. In other words, just work with me for a minute, right? If I know that all of the people in my marketing department are allowed to have access, or all my people, let's say human resources, right? All of the people in my human resources department are going to be allowed to see the human resources data. Then I might want to put all my HR data into a very specific container for human resources. And then I can set the permissions at the highest level, which is going to save me a lot of administrative, really nightmares. Because if you are keeping everything in one container and then you have subdirectories and you're partitioning it all out and you don't think about it in that way, it can make your permissions management very, very difficult. So just keep in mind, access control, we're going to get into that in this series. I'm going to dive into that because it's important, but you want to be strategic with that. Now, within a container, you can have directories and subdirectories. Directories and subdirectories are a little bit different. You can set permissions at the directory and the subdirectory level as well. So if you have a piece of your data that's very, it's part of HR, but it's like, salaries or something, and only these individuals are allowed to see that, you can put specific permissions on that. This kind of reminds me, it's not the same thing. So somebody who's a SharePoint admin listening to this is going to be like, Mitchell, what are you talking about? But to me, this reminds me of a very granular permissions that you can get into with like SharePoint, which was always a nightmare when it got really, really deep into all these different subsites and just layering that out. This can get like that too if you don't think through this process at the beginning. So be careful with that. But directories and subdirectories can have uppercase characters. They can have underscores. You can name them a little bit differently. You're not limited to the same requirements you are with a container. So be aware of that. Now, if you want to upload and download files, you want to work with files within your data lake, you must create a container. They have to be in a container. You can't just go into your data lake and upload files right there into the root. So when you open up the data lake, and we're going to go there in just a moment, we're going to look at our data lake and we're going to see our containers. Within containers, we can have, directories and then subdirectories, and we will be uploading our files to either the root of a container, that's fine, or we'll upload it to a directory or a subdirectory that we create. that makes sense for what we're trying to do. All right, now the way that we upload and download files is we can do that through a number of different ways. We can do it directly through the Azure portal. We can do it with Azure Storage Explorer. You can also do it with PowerShell, and there's lots of other ways that you can do that. There's many different ways that you can interact with your data lake, which makes sense because you might have applications out there that need to connect and write the data directly to the data lake so you can process it and so you can see that in live, real time or whatever that is. But we're going to take a look at the first two options on this list, which is going to be doing it manually through the Azure portal. Now we're getting more familiar with that, but then also we're going to jump into, in this video, so it's a longer video, Azure Storage Explorer as well. Now, Azure Storage Explorer, what is the purpose of it? Quite frankly, it's to easily work with your Azure storage data, whether that's your general purpose storage accounts or whether that's Azure Data Lake Store. The purpose of it is to be able to easily work with that data. And I love Azure Storage Explorer. It is great. I use it all the time. And for me, I have multiple subscriptions across multiple tenants. And so I can log into all of those different subscriptions from Azure Storage Explorer, and then I can see all of them and I can easily drill down into them. I can, do permissions. There's certain management, administrative type things you can do from within Azure Storage Explorer. You can upload files, you can download files, you can delete files, you can move them. You can kind of do all the stuff you need to do. And where this becomes very advantageous is for those users in your organization that need to work with Data Lake, but they really don't need to know anything about Azure. So you can send them to a class and teach them all about Azure just so they can work with Data Lake. Or you can say, hey, I've given you permissions to work with the Data Lake. Here's Azure Storage Explorer, log in. They never have to go to the Azure portal, never have to open up a web browser to connect to Azure. Great tool. I love it. It's an awesome tool. I will put in the description the link to go download Azure Storage Explorer. And if I forget, just send me a real quick email at Pearson@pragmaticworks.com. Send me a quick email and let me know I forgot, and I'll add it to the description, okay? And the reason I say I might forget is because I build these videos for the series quite a ways out. So I might not release this for X number of weeks after I've recorded it. So if by some chance I forget, send me an email. Now, Azure Storage Explorer. There's a few different things we want to talk about here. One, it's versatile, right? You can manage all your accounts in multiple subscriptions across all your Azure regions from this one Storage Explorer by just logging into those different accounts. And you can do it from other people's subscriptions if they give you the name and the access key. It's extensible, so you can add new features and capabilities with extensions to manage even more of your cloud storage needs. It's obviously accessible through an intuitive graphical user interface. And it is, quite frankly, as we get to the last part here, it is secure. So you can do levels of security here. So for example, if I log in from Azure Storage Explorer, it still is going to use whatever permissions have been granted to me. And you can actually apply permissions. If you have the proper access within the Azure portal, you can actually set up permissions through Azure Storage Explorer. So it has that administrative aspect to it as well. That was a big introduction there, but sometimes it requires quite a big introduction to really dive in and understand what it is that we're working with. Now we're going to go into the demo, so I'll see you back over in our Azure portal. I'm back in the Azure portal, and I've already logged in or went to our resource group like we did before. Once again, the way you get there is once you log in, you go to your portal menu. So you go to portal.azure.com, open up the portal menu over here on the right, go to your resource groups, and then find the resource group that you're working with if you're following along in this series, ASA YouTube series. If you're just working in your Azure environment, then go to whatever resource group has your storage account. You can also, you should normally have over here on the left-hand side in your favorites something called storage accounts. And you can click on that and you can see all the storage accounts that you have access to within that subscription. But this is another way to get there. And so that's the way I'm doing it right here. Now, once you go into your resource group, you'll see all of the resources that have been provisioned for that resource group. And what I'm going to do is actually open up and go into my storage account. Now, you'll notice that it's still called a storage account here. But when we provisioned this data lake back in episode number 2, we told it that this is a hierarchical namespace. We enabled that. So it is a data lake, but it still calls it a storage account here. So that is a little confusing. But I'm going to go ahead and click right there to open it up. And this is going to open up kind of that administrative page for Azure Data Lake Store. And what I want to do is a real quick overview of the interface, and then we're going to dive right into just working with it, right? And so the time that it takes to understand all of the properties that you're going to see over here on the left, there's a pretty big investment of time. I'm going to spend this video and then the next video, I'm going to get into things like networking, access keys, access control. So we're going to get into some of those really important things that you're probably looking forward to. So you'll see that in the next one. But where we're going to go for this one is over here under data storage. I'm going to click on containers. All right. And containers are where we're going to store that data that we're using for analytical needs. This is where our applications are going to be writing, when transactions occur. If it's writing them out to flat files, it's going to be writing them here. If we're uploading files, we're going to be writing them to our containers. So this is where we're going to go, right? And so if I click right there on containers, it's going to bring me right here to this screen. And what I want to do on this screen is I want to go ahead and provision a new container. This is, if you remember, this Synapse right here, that is the default file system, the default container for our ASA workspace. We actually created that when we were going through the provisioning phase back in episode 2, right? So I'm going to create a new container here, and I'm just going to call this one training. So I'll come over here to the right, and I'm going to call this one training. Remember, a container must be all lowercase. Also, from a security perspective, if it's allowed within your Azure Data Lake, you can actually set up a container or blobs within a container to be anonymous. This can be really important if you need to access that data through, some system or some application that you've built and you don't want to have to pass permissions in. You can do anonymous here as well. You can actually find that and turn that on and turn that off, if I remember correctly, under, I think it is configurations right here. So I'm not going to click there because it'll take me from where I am, but under configuration, there's quite a few different settings that you can update. Now, what I'm going to do is we've given it a name of training. So down here at the very bottom, I'm going to go ahead and click create, and that's going to create that container. So once again, you can think of these containers right here really kind of like a file system or a folder that you create on your laptop or on your work machine, okay? They're just a place where we're going to store our files that we're working with. And of course, we can set these up with directories and subdirectories underneath them. Now, to take it a step further, we can add permissions to this, right? We can add, Mitchell Pearson only has access to training. So when he logs into the Azure portal or he connects to this, this data lake through Azure Storage Explorer, the only thing Mitchell Pearson sees in this entire data lake is just that one container or just that one file. Depends on how granular you get with those permissions, which I'm going to enjoy talking to you about in the next video. Now I'm going to click on training to open up that container. And then this is where I can now, if I zoom in here, once I log in, I can now upload files. I can add a new directory. So this is where you start building out that folder structure. And then you can do things like refresh and so on and so forth. So let's go ahead and add a new directory here. We'll go over to the right. I'm going to go ahead and call this one training data. This is the same exact folder system I use for pretty much all my courses that I teach. And then we'll go down to the very bottom here and click save. And that is going to now create for us a folder. All right. And so we're inside of, up here at the top, we're inside of our training container, right? So we're inside of our ASA YouTube series. We're inside of our data lake. We're inside of our training container. And now we have this directory, which I'm going to click on. And now I'm going to upload files directly to this directory here. Now, when I click on that, over here on the right-hand side, it's going to open up this window. You can see that I tested this earlier, primarily just to make sure it would go directly to my folder. So let me go ahead and delete that reference right there. And I'm going to come up here and click on select a file. Now, when I select a file, it's going to bring me directly to the location I wanted it to. And I'm going to grab one of my files from here and I'm going to upload it. So I'm just going to grab this Parquet file. All right. And when I grab the Parquet file, I can double click on it if I want. You can also, by the way, multi-select if you want. But I'm going to go ahead and grab the Parquet file, double click on it right here. And that's going to open it up. And then the next thing I want to do is go ahead and click upload, right? There is some advanced options here. For example, you can choose to override it if it already exists. Oh, it's right there. Override if it already exists. You can also choose the access tier. This is actually really important, the access tier. I don't know if I'll get into that in this series, but really important to know what access tier should I use for both, making sure you can reference the data in a very performant way, but also to manage cost. So there's a lot of really cool stuff you can do to manage this automatically. All right, and so I'm going to go ahead and click upload here. and then close that up. So when I get into the tiers and how to create essentially automation around that to move your data between various tiers to save money, that's something that I cover in my Introduction to Azure Data Lake course out on the Pragmatic Works on-demand learning platform. All right, so we have now uploaded the file to our data lake. I can delete the file from my local machine, it's gone, but now it's in my data lake and there are 3 copies readily available. So that is awesome. And you saw how easy it was to upload files. And so you're going to have applications, line of business applications. You're going to have users who are connecting from their local machine through Azure Storage Explorer who can just very quickly interact with and upload files here. And like I said before, in a lot of ways, it has that similar feel, look and feel to like OneDrive account, right? Or some other cloud application, some other data center where you're storing your data. Now, if I want to look at this, let me kind of go through a couple of other quick things real quick here. I'm going to go ahead and I can click on this. I can delete it. All right. I can change the tier, meaning I can change this from hot to cold to archive if I want. I can also click on the actual file. And when I click on the actual file, I can get a whole bunch of information about that file here. Now, because this is a Parquet file, clicking on edit really isn't going to do a whole lot for me. But if this was like a CSV file, I can click edit and I can actually make changes right here. I can look at it. I can kind of preview it. If you have versions turned on within your general purpose blob storage account, because versioning is not quite available in Data Lake, you can see your version history, which can be really important here, but you can get some really cool, really good information. Now, the other thing I want to launch and I want to show you real quick is how to work with Azure Storage Explorer. Once again, and I don't have it. I was thinking maybe I had it open here. Let me see if I have I do not. So I'm going to go ahead and pull over real quick Azure Storage Explorer. So this is Azure Storage Explorer. This is what it looks like. I actually just updated my version of Azure Storage Explorer. And I want to go ahead and log in. I want to connect because right now I'm not connected to any storage account. I'm not connected to any data lake. So I'm going to click right here on the plug icon. And this is going to tell me, all right, how do you want to connect to your Azure storage account? Do you want to connect through your subscription? Do you want to connect through storage account or service? So there's a couple of different ways that you can connect, but I'm going to connect through my subscription. All right, so I'm going to click on subscription. This is going to be the most common method for sure. Then I am just in a regular Azure tenant. If you're in like Azure Government, you would use that option, but I'm going to go with Azure here. And then down at the very bottom right, I'm going to go ahead and click Next. And then it's going to launch a web page here. And this is where I now need to authenticate. So I'm going to say, all right, Mitchell Pearson at pragmaticworks.com. It says I'm authenticated. So that's cool. I was expecting it to give me some multi-factor authentication or something, but that might have worked out. Yep, there it is. I'm already in. So I was expecting a little bit more there, but because I've been working in ASA, it already recognized me. So we're good to go. Now, this is what just happened here. Let me show you this. When I connected with Pearson, it recognized that I have data lakes and I have storage accounts in various different subscriptions. So like I have the Pragmatic Works training. This is where we host a lot of our stuff for like our on-demand learning platform and other things that we do. I'm not going to need that, so I'm going to go ahead and hide that. I am going to bring back all of the storage accounts and data lakes from my Visual Studio subscription right here. If I wanted to go to any of these other subscriptions, I could, go in here and I could include them, but I'm not going to. I'm just going to include this one. But the cool thing is that I could include many of them if I wanted to. All right. So now down here at the bottom, it doesn't look like you have to click OK. So now I can go back to File Explorer. And as soon as I come back, you'll notice right here, here's my subscription. And if I expand that, I'm going to be able to see all of my storage accounts right here. Now, along with that, it actually tells me which ones are Azure Data Lake. And if they're not specified, it's just a regular general purpose blob storage account. And so you could see that right there. You'll also notice that we are currently working with this data lake. This is where we just uploaded a file a moment ago. So if I come in there and I expand it, I should see my container here under blob containers. And there's my training container. There is the directory that we created. And if I go into that directory, I can see my holiday.snappy.parquet file. And from here, I can do a lot of the things that we were doing in the Azure portal. I can come up here, I can download this file, I can upload additional files, I can even upload an entire folder. I can go to more right here. I can actually move this. Let me go ahead and hide myself here. I can move this to another location. If I uploaded the files and they're in the wrong place, I can upload this or move this to another location. I can manage access control list through Azure Active Directory authentication. I can do that right here. So there's a lot of stuff you can do. I can also go back. So let's go back a tier, click on new folder, and I can add a new folder in here. Maybe I want to do one called, let's do internet sales. So I'll do internet sales, and then I'll click OK. And now I have another folder here. And if I go into that folder, I can now do upload and say either an entire folder that already exists, or I can do files. So let me go ahead and just click on files. And then I'm going to go and click on the files that I want to select by clicking right here. And I'm going to grab all of the files right here that I want to load to my data lake. So all of these internet sales files, I'll click open, and then I'll click upload. And really within a very short amount of time, all of those files are going to be uploaded into my data lake. It tells me it is successful. Everything has been transferred, and I can see all of my files right here. Once again, right there in the data lake, ready to go. Now, I know this was a little bit longer video than we've done in some of our other videos in this series, and that's going to happen from time to time. I might have some that are 45 minutes or an hour long because I want to make sure I cover those topics in depth. But this is pretty cool. This is a great tool right here, Azure Storage Explorer, to upload files, download files, apply permissions, and there's so much more we could talk about with just this. And once again, if you want to see more on this and really understand it better, you want to take the Pragmatic Works training. Dump into those classes that we have, maybe whether it's a private boot camp, a public boot camp, or just the on-demand learning. We're here to help you out. I hope you enjoyed this video. I'll see you in the next one.